Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Seasons Bereavement Program's Community Workshop on Grief. I'm so glad that you all came out tonight to hear some stories and get some information about grief. Greg from Missoula Community Access Television will be taping this tonight. And my name, to start off, is Terry Bauer, and I'm an MSW student over at the university. I'll be graduating in May with my master's in social work, and I have had a passion for death and dying from the day I can remember, and have really enjoyed the graduate work that I've done. I've been able to focus my education on death and dying and really get to learn a lot about grief. And so I'm just going to give you a little overview of grief and some factors that may influence grief, and then I'll finish up with some myths and some realities that we face as grieving folks. And then we have a panel here tonight that will sort of tell you stories of their experience with grief, and then we'll wrap up with a question and answer, sort of a communication piece at the end, where you all can share your stories as well. And so hopefully it'll be a fun 2 hours and you'll get lots to take home with you tonight. Basically, grief is the natural and normal process of having suffered a loss. And a lot of times grief is associated with death, but you can grieve any type of losses, whether it is a divorce or a disability due to illness or an accident. If you've moved, you may be grieving the house that you've left. So you can grieve in lots of different ways for lots of different losses. It often comes in cycles or waves. You'll notice that it may become less frequent and less intense the more time that passes. But you'll still notice that it's a circular and sort of a wave motion, and those sort of happen on significant dates, anniversaries, birthdays, things like that. But like I said, they'll tend to become less frequent and less intense the more time that passes. There are some common reactions to grief, and when we're grieving, we're all individuals, and our grief process also is very individualistic, and you'll probably hear from their stories and from some of your own experiences that everybody's going to grieve differently. There's lots of stuff out there that gives us theories and stages and all of this stuff, and that's all really great information, but the important thing to remember is that everybody's experience is going to be different because we're all individuals, and you yourself may be grieving differently depending on the type of loss that you've had, your nature to the person or the object that you've lost. So your grief is going to be very individualized for each loss that you have, as well as just for yourself. So nobody's experience is exactly the same. They may be similar. So the things that I'm going to point out to you are just some common reactions that lots of people have reported through their grief process. And adults and children, they all grieve differently. Men and women grieve differently. So those are just some things to keep in mind. I've broken them into some different categories. And again, these are just some common reactions that folks have had. Some of the physical reactions that people report when they're grieving, a lot of folks have a tightness in their chest or a shortness of breath, difficulty sleeping, may find changes in eating patterns. You may find that you are more vulnerable to illness. If you're a person that maybe gets 2 or 3 colds a year, once you're in that grief process, you may find yourself getting more colds, maybe 7 that year. And that's all very normal and very common. A lot of people report muscle tension, and it might feel like you've just worked out, and you haven't, but your muscles are kind of sore and achy. That's all very normal. People have reported some emotional reactions, and those are sadness and anger, fatigue, anxiety. There's also some other emotional reactions such as relief or a sense of peace, depending on what, again, the nature of your relationship was to the person that you've lost or the object that is now gone. And that's all normal. Sometimes when people feel relief or that sense of peacefulness, sometimes guilt is associated with that too. It all just depends. Some of the behavioral reactions that folks have reported, there's an avoidance of the reminders of the deceased. You may find yourself, if you've moved and you're grieving the loss of that house, you may find yourself avoiding that neighborhood. You may not want to listen to music or watch television shows that remind you of the person that you've lost. There's a disorientation to time and space, and this is when people start feeling like they're going crazy. We all think that we should know what day of the week it is or what the date is today. It's all very normal to start feeling a little discombobulated in the world. Folks might withdraw from their friends and family. They may have difficulty concentrating, and that's, again, all very normal and very common. There are some cognitive and intellectual reactions that people have reported. One of the big ones is disbelief and denial in the reality of the loss. There's some confusion. They may be dreaming of the deceased or the objects that they have lost. There's a search to understand the implication of the loss. A lot of times we're searching to find what this loss means to us now in our life and what our life is going to look like now that we've lost this person or the object. Some people have reported an increase in creativity and have reported that they feel more wise or they've gained some wisdom from having been through their grief process. Some of the spiritual reactions, a lot of times there can be a destruction of beliefs or ideas. You really start questioning your ideas about the world and about the way that things should work when you suffer a loss. So people are sort of looking at that and trying to reconstruct what their new ideas and what their new beliefs are going to be after a loss. There's a search for meaning or connectedness, and whether that's wanting to be more connected to people or whether that's withdrawing and maybe reconnecting to another animal if you've suffered a loss of a pet, or maybe picking up painting or something else that you might feel connected to after you've suffered a loss. They may question their faith or their view of the world, kind of like what I said before. If you've got this certain way that you've always looked at the world and have believed that things work or should work, once you've suffered a loss, you might just question if that's really still true or not. People also may develop a new understanding of the meaning of life. So once they've had some time to figure out what this new loss means to them in their life, that's going to change the meaning of their life and what life should be. Now, children grieve and may have some of the same reactions that the adults have that I just mentioned, but they're going to have different ways of expressing it. Where we as adults can sit down and talk about our grief and talk about the feelings that we're having and the thoughts that we're having, for kids it's a little bit different. So I'm just going to run through some different age groups and give you just a little rundown of some of the things you might see in children who are grieving. But again, this is something that shouldn't be put in a box, because just as adults, kids are going to individualize their grief process as well. Infant to 2, these guys are going to have some general distress, maybe some sleeplessness. You may see them responding to the caregiver's grief response. Kids 2 to 5 may seem a little bit confused, may seem a little bit more agitated at night. If they were kids who were having a regular bedtime, very easily put to bed, while they're grieving, after the loss, they may now start being a little bit more fussy at bedtime, maybe having more trouble sleeping, may want to sleep with the lights on. They may start to regress a little bit at this point. They might start wetting the bed again if they were potty trained. They can understand that a profound event has occurred, but they may not understand death as we would understand death. They may have repeated questions about death or the event that has happened. And if you're talking to children, they will ask you the same questions over and over and over, and that's just kind of how they take in the information, and then they may go play and sort of process it and come back and ask you the same question or ask you a different question, and that's just them processing and trying to understand whatever has just happened. kids who are 5 to 8, they want to understand death in a more concrete way. So they're really going to probably be asking you questions to really figure out what death is about and what death really means. They may be in denial of the loss, may have some anger, show some signs of general stress. They may also behave as if nothing has happened. You may tell them that grandma has died, and they'll say, okay, and then go out and play. And they may have some magical thinking, and this is really important to be aware of if you're dealing with children who have experienced loss. Magical thinking is when children believe that their wants or wishes or words can cause someone to become ill or die. If I'm a child on the playground and I'm having a little tiff with another child, and I say, I wish that you would have never been born, and then maybe that day or another day the child dies, then all of a sudden I start to believe that I caused that to happen. And that magical thinking leads to guilt, which can complicate their grief issues. So if you're ever dealing with kids who are grieving, it's really important to figure out if there's magical thinking involved. 8 to 12, there's shock and denial. They may have a facade of coping. They may be pretty good and make us believe that they're doing okay and they're coping. But at this age, it's a really good time and okay to ask them really what they're feeling and how they are doing. So you can kind of gauge that and see if they are coping well or if it's just kind of that facade. They have an understanding of the finality of death, and they may develop a morbid curiosity. They may start wanting to know what happens to your body as it's decomposing, what happens when you're buried, what happens when you're cremated. Excuse me. And they might start drawing skeletons and Grim Reapers, and that can be a little bit scary, but it's all very normal. And that's just them trying to figure out this new concept of death. And in adolescence, they're going to react a little bit closer to as adults. They're going to have the shock and anxiety, depression. The difference is that they may not have the same coping mechanism. So even though they can understand and they'll be able to talk, it's good to be aware that they may not have the same coping skills that we as adults would have to deal with their grief. So some of the factors that are going to influence how the grief process goes, whether we're adults or children, is the nature of the relationship. So it depends. One of the examples that I have is the spouse or the child of the deceased is going to have a different process than maybe the coworker or the neighbor that barely knew them. Those grief processes are going to look very different. The cause or the nature of the loss will affect the grief process, whether it was sudden, unexpected, prolonged. That's all going to affect it. The age and the gender of the person who is grieving, that's going to, like I stated before, the children and adults grieve differently, and men and women have different grieving styles as well. The life experience of the griever has a big impact on their grief process. So if you've experienced lots of different losses or none at all, and maybe this is your first death, your grief process is going to look a little bit different from others. The personality and coping style of the griever. And then the last one that I have is the support available. So whether you've got a good support system of friends or family, or you're the type of person that's willing to go out and talk to a counselor or seek the help of agencies, that's going to make a difference for the grief process as well. So the last thing that I have is just a couple common grief myths that are all out there, and if you've ever been grieving, I'm sure you've heard some of them your own, and I've just picked out a couple, but there's lots out. And in Western culture, we're socialized to regard grief as something that should just be really quick. We want a quick fix to everything, and when something happens to us, we kind of just don't want to deal with it. We just want it to be over so we can move on and get on with our lives. And that kind of lends itself to some of these myths that come on. So I've got a couple, and I'll talk about the realities for a couple minutes. The first one is that all losses are the same. The reality is that each person's experience is unique. So you may have experienced more than one death, but your grief process for that individual death is going to look very different for you. And if you're a sibling and you lose a parent, your processes are going to be different as well. The next one is that everyone grieves in the same way. There's no right way, no standard way to grieve. There's no book that when you lose someone, someone hands you this rule book and it lays out exactly how you're supposed to do it. It's a very individual process, and you will figure it out kind of as you go. You know yourself better than anyone, and it's really your process. And so you just make it your own. The next myth is it is helpful to encourage the person grieving to be brave, keep a stiff upper lip, or just deal with it. And I find, especially living in Montana, we kind of have that pioneering spirit, and we're supposed to be these tough people who can live in this environment, and you're supposed to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and just keep on going. And that's really damaging. And a lot of times we also don't know what to say to people who are grieving, and so we might say something like this, well, just, it'll get better, just be brave and move on. And sometimes the best thing to know if you're around someone who's grieving is you maybe don't need to say anything at all. Maybe the best thing to do is just sit with them, maybe listen to them. They may want to tell their story. So as people who aren't grieving and just accompanying these folks through their process, sometimes it's okay just not to say anything. And the last thing I have is an individual must talk about grief in order to express grief. This one's a big one, especially when working with kids. Each individual is going to find their own way on their journey with grief. And talking doesn't always help everyone, especially kids. They may not have the intellectual or the cognitive ability to do so. And so they're going to be expressing their grief through artwork and play. And some adults find that easier to do. They might be journaling, writing poems. If you're musical, you might write a song. So just talking about it and may not be the only way to process your grief. And to dispel these myths and misconceptions, I think education is key. And that's why I'm really excited to see so many people here that are willing to maybe learn something and hear some other folks' stories and maybe share your own stories. Just conversation is going to be key to learning that there's not one way to grieve at all. So that's all I have for you, and I would just like to thank you for coming and being willing to hear some stories and gather some knowledge, and just be aware of how grief affects all of our lives. So I will turn it over to the panel, and when they're done, we'll open it up for questions and conversation. So thank you.
My name is Maureen O'Malley, and with Terry's help, I'm going to facilitate this conversation tonight. We're here with some wonderful people who have generously given of their time to talk about some deeply emotional experiences which they've walked through and come out on the other side. And it's a great honor for me to be sitting here with them. I'm a social worker here in town, and currently I'm the coordinator of the local suicide prevention network. So if any of you have any questions about that when we're done, I'd be happy to talk with you some more. I'd like to introduce you to these people. On the end is Laura, who lost her husband a few years ago. And next to her is Dale, who also was widowed when her husband died 7 years ago. To my immediate right is Ellen, who's going to talk with you about ongoing grief and loss. She lives with chronic and debilitating illness, and that's a different form of loss. On my left is Linda, whose son was in the military and was killed in Afghanistan. And on the end there is my friend Greg, who's a coroner with the Sheriff's Department, and he's going to tell us some about the demands of his job. He's the person who goes out and knocks on those doors, sometimes early in the morning and late at night, to break this kind of news to people. And we don't think often enough about what it's like to walk in the shoes of people like him. So we'll start with Dale.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. This one's on? Okay. Thank you. I have the luxury of going first, but that means I don't know what everyone else is going to say. So I'm going to share with you my story, but I have to tell you first, I'm a nurse professionally, and I'm a cardiac nurse at that. So when my husband had a cardiac arrest at home, I knew exactly what to do. As hard as it was, I knew exactly what to do. I was very comfortable in the ER here, and it really wasn't until it was time to leave that I was struck by I'm leaving the comfort zone of where I know at least what's going on to go into this world where I don't know where to begin. I should tell you I have 3 children, and at the time they were young. One was going into 1st grade, one was going into 5th, and one was going into 8th. So I can speak to the children's part of grief, and I can tell you, just briefly I'll mention that the support I got from the teachers in the Missoula Public Schools was phenomenal. And I've talked to other parents who have not been so blessed, but I felt very blessed that the teachers in the classrooms for my children went above and beyond so that when my children did go back to school, and we needed a schedule at a certain point, it was very helpful to me to have like an extra set of eyes on my children, and they knew the story. And one of the simplest things was with my daughter in middle school was, at the middle school she was at, they team teach. So there was a team of teachers, which meant I only had to tell my story once. And that was amazing to me, because if I had to have gone and told 6 different or 5 different teachers the same story, it would have been overwhelming to me. But I told it to one teacher who then shared it with the team, and I knew there was a bunch of eyes on my daughter. And that seems so simple, but it was very valuable to me as a parent. And then when she went to high school, I went and told the counselor the story. And again, I told the story once, and the counselor was the person who facilitated that through the teachers so that I didn't have to tell the story all the time. And it's a simple thing, but it made a very big difference. But the teachers were wonderful, and that made that really helped us as we worked through those early years. I can also speak to what was helpful. I was very well supported. I had a lot of friends in the community. I was pretty well established in Missoula, so friends and church groups and family was all very supportive. But, you know, our normal reaction when there's a death is to go with food, and that is a wonderful reaction. But I truly remember food coming in the front door and coming in the side door, and I'm hiding food in the oven so that the people coming in the other door with another dinner for us and I complained about it, and finally my friend looked at me and said, "You are living every woman's dream. Dinner is delivered every day at 5 o'clock, and quit complaining about it." But the volume of food almost became overwhelming. And one of the things that was most helpful was when someone would put their name on their serving dish, like even just a return address, like a little sticky, because I ended up with so many dishes and I didn't know where they belonged. And again, it seems like most of the people didn't care whether they got their dishes back or not, but I cared. And I remember very clearly, it had been several months since my husband had died, and someone I worked with called me up and said, "Are you guys going to be home on Thursday?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Do your kids like pizza?" And I said, "Yeah." And so she called Pizza Hut and just had the pizza delivered to our house. And it had been several months, so I wasn't drowning in food, but the kids were so appreciative of pizza coming as opposed to the casseroles and, you know, all this sort of other food we had gotten for so long. And that was such a simple little thing, but when it happened so many months later, it was really helpful just to have someone. So I didn't have to worry about dinner on Thursday night, that week. And those are little things, but it's amazing what a difference they make. And having people to talk to and having people, some people just came and took my children to the library or took them for a bike ride or took them for a couple hours. And in those early days, you know, I needed some time to myself. So that, although I didn't want them out of my sight, when someone came and took them, you know, I had a couple hours to either lay down or to process or to do whatever. And I didn't like them being gone very long. And most of the people who came sensed that. But that was another very valuable gift that someone came and took them for a couple hours. And then professionally, I work with families in the hospital and I work with nursing students now, but I really work to support the families because I think as healthcare professionals, I think we do a good job at the time of death. We help the family, but it's that sending them out into the world that I think we forget about. And we hope that the community at large will come support them. But, I think as professionals, we have an obligation to keep in touch with those families over time. I've gotten much more direct about saying I'm sorry for their loss. The other piece is you never know what to say. And I think it was already mentioned, sometimes you don't have to say anything. And I remember my kids all played hockey, and one of the hockey dads said something to me about my husband because he played hockey with him, and I, of course, started crying, and he said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry. And I said, well, you didn't make me cry. I cry every day. I'd rather hear that story about you playing hockey with my husband or my kids or whatever it was. I'd rather hear the story, and yes, I'll cry, but, I was crying every day, and the tears make the other person uncomfortable. They don't tend to make the bereaved individual uncomfortable, at least not in my experience. And those stories are important, and being able to share that, and if you can't say it, it's okay to write a note and send it, and those sorts of things. But everybody's a little different, and I think I just want to reiterate, what works for one person doesn't work for the other person, and you sort of have to feel your way through. But I have found that it is a real honor, those friends of mine and people I've met, some who are sitting here at this table who I've met through bereavement work. It's a common bond, and when you share that with someone else, there's a special bond that will be there forever. And it doesn't have to, it can be with people like Laura, who I haven't seen in a couple years, but the minute she walked in the door and I walked in the door, we connect on a level that will always be there. And what a powerful gift that is to give to someone, to spend time with them, to just be present. And you may not feel like you're doing anything, but trust me, just listening to the story, just being present, just being around. And I have some friends who have become dear, dear, treasured friends that I know to my whole family, all my children and myself, that that friendship would not have developed if they weren't willing to sort of put themselves out there and get to know us and be a support system to us. And now, anytime you fill out that who to contact in an emergency, my kids just know to list this man who played hockey with my husband, who I barely knew. I knew only very socially hello. At the time of my husband's death. Now that is the name that gets listed for an emergency contact for all my children, for myself, for all, and we've just developed a very strong friendship over time, and that's a treasured gift. I could share a zillion other things, but I think I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer questions about just about anything as we go on.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ellen. I'm going to ask your indulgence because public speaking is not easy for me, and I am quite nervous, so please bear with me. Thank you. Loss is a very big subject. A variety of losses happen to almost everyone at some time. Grieving is not always about death, about losing another person. And that's what I chose to talk about, the kind of grieving that doesn't necessarily mean that someone has died. My comments are going to be a mixture of both professional and personal experiences with grieving. I have been fortunate to be able to practice my profession of social work for well over 35 years. in a variety of settings, many of them medical. I've tried to help others face the loss of body parts, the loss of function, and the loss of independence. Sometimes the loss you encounter in a hospital or a clinic is immediately obvious, like someone with an amputation. But sometimes losses come as a terrible surprise, and I want to give you an example of that. There was a young man who just perhaps no more than a week before he was brought to the hospital, graduated from a teacher's college in the state of Kansas. He came from a little town. He was just known as the good, all-around wonderful kid. Everybody loved him. Unfortunately, there are a lot of unmarked railroad crossings in Kansas, and he and some friends got hit by a Santa Fe. He survived broken bones and being on a ventilator and all sorts of other terrible things, and everybody was feeling pretty optimistic. However, as a very unwanted surprise, because of the damage to his head, his entire personality had changed. He was the most foul-mouthed, abusive, rotten kid you ever wanted to deal with. And here he had been just weeks ago, this wonderful, wonderful boy. You can imagine what that did to his family, and the whole staff was just undone by this. And it was something that perhaps long-term could be made a little better, but it wasn't going to go back to what it was. The grieving sometimes looks a lot like anger. I've seen women at their husband's bedside after their husband had a stroke, and they've already purchased their recreational vehicle and they plan to travel. They're going to retire, and here he goes and has this awful stroke, and she's screaming at him in the hospital room. How could you do this? How could you do this? We had it all planned. You know, at first, I will admit that was a little shocking, but it was not uncommon. There was a young paraplegic whose anger and fear and sadness came through in a most dramatic way. He managed in his wheelchair to not only get off the rehabilitation unit, but to get out of the hospital building, and about 5:30 or 6, which was rush hour, to park the wheelchair in the middle of an intersection of these two incredibly busy streets. So you just really don't know how grieving will show up. When you talk about mental illness, they also grieve. There are some that are particularly obvious. The person who has been, say, diagnosed with Alzheimer's knows what the prognosis is. He or she knows what's coming. And it results in anticipatory loss. And sometimes they stop doing things long before they have to stop doing things, because they can't get their mind off of what's going to happen. And that's another place where you see fear, anger, and sadness. I wanted to comment on Terry's comment about children. I saw a little boy, 5 years old, whose mother was terminally ill, and she wanted her sons to begin getting help before she died. And very nice little kid, and I worked with him, and it was quite normal for him to say to me, "When Mom dies, who's going to take care of me?" And, you know, I told that to some people, and they thought that was just shocking. It was awful. Doesn't he love his mother? That's a perfectly normal concern for a 5-year-old child. I have come to believe over the years that the death of dreams can be harder to accept than reality itself. I think the phrase I've heard so many times is, "It wasn't supposed to be this way," as if we all had a guarantee. And obviously we don't, but we had a plan in our own minds, and it just wasn't supposed to be this way. We had a dream, and now it's not going to come true. I spent many years practicing in medical settings, and unfortunately for me, I have spent a lot of time being a patient myself. Let me assure you that it is much better to be on the outside of the bed rail. There's no question about that. My way of coping throughout my life, as I was born with some serious congenital problems, wouldn't work anymore. I felt totally lost. 4 years ago, I suffered a loss that was bigger than I realized initially. Declining health resulted in my forced retirement. I hated it. I hated the people who said, "Oh, isn't it wonderful that you're retired?" No, I'm miserable. I'm depressed. I'm not happy. I miss my work. I still do. I lost more than my employment. I lost my identity for a long time. My latest surgery was a scary business, but I was lucky to have skilled physicians, so here I am. At the same time, I have 3 cousins, all close to my age, who are very, very seriously ill with cancer. And because, this is nonsensical, you understand, because nobody ever expected me to have a long life because I had all these problems, I feel guilty because I should be the one who's really, really sick, not them. Doesn't make sense, but it's there. My problem after this surgery was that I felt disappointed because my expectations were totally unrealistic. They were based upon outcomes of numerous surgeries I had when I was much younger and stronger, and I grieved and I felt let down and I was angry. Until I finally examined how unrealistic my expectations were. Because in the past, really scary surgeries resulted in me being capable of doing things I could never do before, feeling so much better, having so much better quality life, and I just assumed that that's what was going to happen. Well, it wasn't that way, and I had to accept the fact that success in this surgery was the fact that I was still alive. Based on my prior experience with others, I know I'm fortunate, but I still grieve for the work I loved and the chance to help others the way I used to. I guess we never are quite the same after a major loss. the way and length of grieving are as diverse as the people who are involved. After my father died about 15 years ago, about a month after he died, my mother said, "Well, I guess I should be through grieving now." I thought, what is this? And, you know, these people had been married for over 60 years. And I said, "Well, why are you saying that?" And that's the way she had been raised, is you had about a month to grieve, and then you were supposed to be done. You know, the length and the way people grieve are highly idiosyncratic. I have one tip, which has already been mentioned. Please resist the urge to tell someone how to react. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Laura, will you be next?
Well, my name's Laura, and when Maureen called me the other day, she asked me to consider being on this panel. My first response is, what would I talk about? And she said, "Laura, just talk." And I couldn't think of anything quick enough to get out of it, so I said, "I'll call you back tomorrow." And I hemmed and hawed around, and within a few minutes of hanging up, I realized that just talking has been a crucial piece of my family's whole healing process. And so I said I'd give it a try. I have 5 beautiful kids. My youngest is 16 now, and then my daughter, Claire. And then I have 2 sons that are 19 and 2 daughters that are 19. And 7.5 years ago, I came home and my world was turned absolutely upside down. My husband had committed suicide. And this is something that I had never even fathomed in my life. I had never been to a funeral. This was my partner of 21 years. I had spent half my life with him. We had 5 beautiful children. I was devastated. And I think back now and I think, how did I get through it all? And there's actually huge parts I don't remember. I mean, there's blank spaces, but there's those things that I'll always remember. And one of them was that we ate way too much pizza. Way too much pizza. I can't even look at pizza now. And the whole food thing, bring breakfast. That's the meal that we never had anything to eat. We ate a lot of pizza for breakfast, in fact. But I was really fortunate. I had a lot of support, too, in this community. My parents lived in Polson at the time. And I remember they came down immediately. And my mom, she passed away a year and a half ago, but for the last 7 years has been my rock. And it was funny. Her whole relationship with me changed after my husband died. She was solid. She was always there for me. Unfortunately, I think I called her at least once a week, whining and crying and complaining. But she always just listened. And that was really important. But the next day, I remember they came down and they walked in with a giant roasted turkey. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what is going on here? And she said, "It's Thanksgiving." And she said, "I don't care if you ever celebrate Thanksgiving again. That's a decision that you and your children will have to make. And I understand that. But today, we're going to try to go through it for your kids' sake. They need something. Their world right now is turned upside down. And they need something that's familiar, something that's some kind of stability for them." Okay, she was right. And when she left, she reminded me, too, that next week is your daughter's 9th birthday. And that, that was the last thing I thought I was going to do. But I was fortunate enough to have some friends that heard her say this, and they arranged the birthday party. And for a few moments during this party, they had arranged it at the bowling alley, I actually saw my daughter smiling. And I realized how important the stability, these routines really were. I mean, I went through the motions for years. Holidays are still hard for me, and I think, why are we doing this? But I quickly realized how important it was to my children. So I was really blessed to have my family. Work immediately called me and said, "You have a month off, a month off paid, and 1 day a year, 1 day a week for the rest of the year." So immediately that whole financial piece was something I didn't have to worry about, and they said, "Focus in on what you need to take care of." So again, I was so blessed. And then, of course, my friends. I actually had a good friend who gathered her children up from Great Falls and came, and for that first 2 months literally lived at my house, fed my children, got them dressed, tried to get them off to school when they could, and just let me lay in my bed or do what I needed to do. One of my other best friends, while Allie was taking care of all the physical part of my household, she was doing the laundry, paying the bills. My other good friend worked on my spiritual piece. I had no church I was affiliated with, and so she went and did a lot of talking with me, and we got some books, but she asked that I do one thing for her, and that was to go see a grieving counselor. And I thought, oh, come on, there's no way, I don't need that. And I was very fortunate. She actually hooked me up with Maureen, and I really am glad that I went through that process and went and talked with her for a while. What I did learn is that grieving is a process. You know, I had no idea. I'd never experienced anything like this. And like these two women have said, is that I remember her saying there's no time frame. And I think I even asked you, like, how long am I supposed to be sad, or is it okay to have a boyfriend again, you know, down the road? And, you know, Maureen assured me that that's it, there's no time frame. Some people, it might take years. Some people, it might take a year. So that was really important for me to hear and understand. Second thing was that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. It's an individual process. We did talk about that, you know, some behaviors are more destructive. And let me tell you, I thought about drowning myself in alcohol there for a while. It would have been easy. Wouldn't have to feel, wouldn't have to think. I actually thought about committing suicide myself. But my mom's words about, "You have 5 beautiful children," kept me going all these years, and were a real motivation to me. It was funny, though, during the funeral, the kids wanted to play one of their father's favorite songs, which was, I think it was Nitty Gritty Dirt Band at the time, had that "You and Me Go Fishing in the Dark" song on. And so it came on during the funeral, and all of a sudden we started singing. My son was clapping his hands, my daughter jumped up and started dancing, and I lost myself, and I started to get up, and my father, I remember, put his hand down on my leg and just gave me this look like, "What are you doing?" And I pulled myself together and realized, oh yeah, this is a funeral, this is a service. What am I doing? And, you know, so we went through it, and afterwards, the kids still talk about it to this day. They said that was so much needed. And what had happened is 2 weeks prior, before my husband had died, we'd all been driving up to Glacier, and we were in the car, and we were all singing, and my husband started goofing around, and he was pushing the accelerator pedal to the rhythm. So this was a lovely memory that we all focused in on. And I realized that humor and the stories are going to be a crucial part of our healing process. And this is something that for years I tried to explain to my parents, that, you know, we will be talking about my husband, Billy. We will be sharing stories. We do still have pictures and items of his in the house. This is what we need to do, even though they didn't think that that was appropriate. The third thing that we talked about, I remember, was that, like you said, grieving has some stages and phases, and that this is all normal feelings. I mean, I thought I was literally going insane. You know, I went through this phase where it was like, oh my God, it was all my fault. I was too fat. I said the wrong thing. And I remember Maureen saying, "Do you really think that's what happened?" And I realized no. Another time, I think we were rolling on the floor, because then I went through a period where I was like telling morbid death jokes, and I was like, what is wrong with me? And again, she helped me to understand that these feelings are all normal, that people grieve and process things in different ways. So this was really helpful to me. So of course, since it was helpful to me, I just assumed it was helpful to my kids. So right away, I got them into counseling. And I asked my children this week, was there something, I asked them if they wanted to come, and they said no. And I said, is there something you'd like me to share? And 3 of them immediately said, don't force kids to go to counseling. It was absolutely the most horrible experience and for my family. And I look back now, and I think it was too soon. As my daughter said, she said, we did not want to talk to some stranger and talk about the way we felt. And she said that was the most horrible experience for us. And where it had been helpful for me, I didn't realize that they just weren't ready to process it. And so I told her I would pass that on. It was funny talking with Maureen too, and talking about how children grieve in different ways and their behaviors. It helped me to accept what was going on. My children's behavior totally changed. I had one that literally slept about 20 hours a day for months on end. I had one that my bubbly, vivacious child totally withdrew and laid around and watched TV and ended up putting on quite a bit of weight. For a while there. The boys seemed like everything was fine, and years later some real aggression and anger came out. But I had some idea that these were some of the normal things that children go through. And then I had one daughter who, some of the ugliest behaviors I've ever seen that came out of her, and it was really, really, really difficult for a period there. But we kept trying different things. We did eventually get them back into counseling, some of them. My one daughter still goes to counseling. It was very hard on her. But it was just a great thing for me. When I asked the kids what did make a difference for you then, if you didn't like the counseling, what helped? And the first thing they all say was that I had gotten them involved later on in the Seasons program at Families First. And what was so important to them is that they connected with a peer group of kids that understood and were going through the same exact, in some ways different thing. And this group, and I've known Dale for years, has been every year. In fact, today we got the brochure for a Camp to Remember, and my daughter said, oh, this is my favorite thing of the year, is Camp to Remember. And it's been kind of, I think it's been wonderful watching these kids network throughout the community. There's a group of them, and there's about an 8-year age span between the youngest and the oldest, and they all go to different schools. Some of them live in Lolo, some live in St. Ignatius, and they call each other. They're there for informal support. They have this network tree thing going where one hears that one isn't doing well or something. They'll call each other, sending emails. And so, as they said, this was probably the most important thing for them, was finding a group of peers that they could identify with. Second thing they said was the humor and the laughter and telling the stories, not to hide it. This was part of their life. Their dad was part of their life. And whereas my parents kept saying, oh, you need to get rid of this stuff, you need to move, that's not what my kids needed. And then the third thing, you mentioned, Dale, was that all of them somehow connected with an adult friend that started taking them places and doing things with them. And for instance, the janitor at their school started going bowling with my son, and 7 years later, they still bowl every Wednesday night. And just having that opportunity to be with different adults, giving me an opportunity to get away from me, for me to get away from them, that was really, really important. I had my boss where I worked took my one daughter that had started just laying around, knew she loved animals, and took her down to a horse barn in Stevensville and got her riding horses. And for several years now she's been doing that, and right now she's over at Rocky in Billings, and she's in equine therapy, and she's doing great. And so I'm really thankful for all the support the community offered here. We're very, very fortunate, I think, to live in Missoula.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Linda, and like Ellen, I'm nervous too. It's a privilege to be here tonight and talk to all of you and to listen to what everyone has to say. I think where I need to begin was that I received a phone call early on a Sunday morning on August 22nd from Italy with first my daughter-in-law crying and then putting a officer on to inform me that my son had been killed. And it woke me up out of a dead sleep about 7:30 in the morning. And I made him tell me 3 times because I couldn't hear, I couldn't absorb, I couldn't wake up. It was an out-of-body experience, you know. Finally, the 3rd time I was able to say it back to him, that Josh had died in a Humvee that was part of a convoy going down a road in Afghanistan that had been, a bomb had been detonated. And there were 5 people in the Humvee, 4 of them died. And Josh was one of them. It was just, I just went numb. I was in shock. I cried, had phone calls to make, was concerned about my daughter-in-law in Italy. I mean, all the thoughts that come 100 miles an hour of what to do, and I'm sitting on my bed just not knowing what to do. Later that day, an officer did arrive at the door from Washington that had been dispatched to drive over to tell me in person. By that time, my other son was driving from Idaho and had just arrived to the house. I still live in the family home where Josh grew up. Family members started to arrive, and it took 8 days to get Josh's body home. And it was when I look back at it now, I was numb through that whole time, but I had a close community of friends with me at the house almost all the time, with family, just lots of support and understanding. And then since Josh grew up in Missoula, it was childhood friends that had to come and tell stories. It was the college friends. It was the after-college friends. It was the people that flew in. It was a family that flew in, and we had about 10 days of constant people. I didn't even try and stop it. I just opened the door knowing that people needed to be here. They needed to be with us. They needed to talk. They needed to share the story that they knew. It was way beyond anything I would have wanted or tried to plan. I just let it go. If I wanted to go to bed, I went in and took a washcloth, shut the door, went to bed. My friends handled it. I just left the room and disappeared for 3 or 4 hours, and I'd come back and another meal would be on the table. There was a lot of food too. It would be a whole new set of friends or some of the same friends. I had a couple of friends that they just refused to leave my side. They rotated, to make sure I was okay. And I look back on that, and that was just a marvelous thing, that when you have close friends and community, that you don't realize how they're going to come forward for you, but they do. And I also am in a place in my life where I can give back sometimes, and this is one of them. After the funeral, after all of that left, my daughter-in-law made the decision to move back from Italy to Montana. Her life was totally interrupted. I thought my life was interrupted. It was, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but I carried so much pain for her at that time to watch her make the decisions that she had to make with her son. And she moved back to Missoula with me and stayed with me for 4 months while she was trying to figure out what to do. And, we became family again, and it was really wonderful. I was able to we were able to grieve together. We moved through a lot by being together so much. She did make the decision to stay in Missoula, and it's good to have her back. And my other son made the decision to move back to Missoula too, so it's like we're all in the same town again and hadn't been for 3 or 4 years. I think the process of grief that I've gone through has been one of shock. That Josh died in 2005, and in 2000 I had separated and divorced and reinvented my life after 28 years of marriage, and had just felt like I'd gotten on my own road again, new job, new life, some of the same friends, still the same house. I love Missoula, I love where I am, and that's probably what has saved me, is that I've had the stability of so many solid things. One of the things that I did was combine my life's work with ministry, and I work in a church here in town. And so I'm part of a very strong community as a result of that. And so as I've needed to take time off work or work less hours, it's been really easy for me to do. Having my life interrupted just at the point of getting it together set me back. I just got real tired, felt like I could never quite get my strength for a period of time, and it's taken all this time. I'm starting to feel really good now. I think the things that have saved me are exercise. I do a lot of walking. I walk to work, yoga, all the breathing. It's amazing. I hike a lot. This last year, I did get remarried, and having happiness in your life makes a lot of difference. I find myself looking for things to make me laugh. I learned to scuba dive, and that has been just a joy. To breathe underwater and to see all the wonders underwater is great. So, but I think, again, it goes along with my yoga that all the breathing, there's a health benefit to it. And I'm not a nurse. I don't know all of the ins and outs of what that means. I just know that it has helped me. And it's healed my brain. I know that when we receive stresses like sudden loss, that it affects our thinking processes, and I'm seeing that slowly regain. The other thing that I've really benefited from is my friends, and to be able to draw on them. And the other part of that is to give back in ministry. There is so much loss in the world. There's so much pain in the world, and it is a part of life. And to be able to be compassionate in a new way. Not that I would have asked for that, but to be compassionate and understand what people are going through. I see it all the time working in the church. There's probably a lot more, but I think that's all I have right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda.
Hi, my name is Greg Hintz, and I'm with the Sheriff's Office here in Missoula. I'm the Chief Deputy Coroner, and I'm a captain of the detectives. I've been in the Sheriff's Office 34 years in June, and I've been a Deputy Coroner since 1978. My job every day is to deal with the cases that come across the desk, but I also serve as a Deputy Coroner on call basis with the other guys. Our role is to investigate cases that are suspicious or not in the attendance of a doctor or the hospital. However, there's a state law where the hospitals are required to report deaths under 24 hours to our office, and we do make reports on that. We're fortunate here in Missoula that we have the state crime lab here to assist us. We have 2 medical examiners that do assist us in determining cause and manner of death, and that is one of the important things that we do on our cases. The other thing is to work with the families. The decedent is not as important to us as it is to work with the families, to make the notification, to make sure that they have somebody with them, and to make sure that if they need somebody from their church or something like that, even if it's 3 in the morning. We're very fortunate in our office to have a police chaplain that if they don't have a preference, we sometimes contact him and he will come with us to make that notification. We have a deputy coroner on every shift, so sometimes it's a uniform officer, and if those deputy coroners are not on shift, then they contact myself or a rotational, an on-call coroner, and they handle that case. We handle probably in excess of 200 cases a year. There's probably 900 deaths that occur in Missoula County, and I get those numbers through the funeral homes. So 200 of them as coroner cases. We used to range anywhere from 250 to 300, but I think it's because of the medical facilities and the services that they have here that some of those, the gunshot wounds, the traumas and that kind of stuff, those people don't become our cases. So I think that's why the reason is down. For every case that has Missoula's a little bit different than the rest of the state. 75% or more of our cases, the disposition of the body is cremation. And by state law, they have to contact our office to make sure that it's okay to do a cremation before the funeral home goes ahead and does that. And a lot of Missoula is such a big area that if the helicopters are bringing people into the hospitals, and if they die here, they have to contact our office. And so we have a lot of contact with the funeral homes on a daily basis. And in fact, we do all the death certificates. Myself and the sheriff do those at the sheriff's office. They do them online now, so we're involved with probably every case that comes across. I would be glad to answer any questions that you have. I think these people here are more important and have more to share because once we make the notification and we get family there and we get the minister there, we get the next door neighbor there, and we've made sure that these people are okay to be left, and sometimes I've stayed with them for 4 or 5 hours until that occurred, then their stories begin on their grieving process. I don't get really involved in that. I do meet with the families later on, a week or so, or maybe a month later to meet with them because they want to sit down and they want to look at the report. I don't let them look at pictures, but I let them look at the report, and I'll provide them anything that we get from the crime lab, the toxicology reports, the autopsy reports. That doesn't include pictures. And I'll give them those because the families are often trying to fill out the paperwork for the insurance companies, and they're trying to find out where they get the death certificates, and they'll often call our office for that. So we stay in constant contact with them on those cases. And it's usually about a month before I get all that paperwork together and to be able to sit down with them. And that happens usually on a daily basis where I meet with a family to talk about those issues. So I don't think I have anything right now. Okay.
So at this time, we'd entertain your questions. You heard them say that any question is a fair one. Or comments. Sure, go ahead.
I'd just like to share, I've been going to hospice group, Richard Strohmeyer. First of all, they don't let anybody come until so many months after death, which I think with your kids, maybe the counseling was too soon.
It was horrible.
And it would have been too soon for me. I should preface this, Sunday in October, 1 month the 1 week before my birthday, my daughter Dawn called me, and we were planning to celebrate my birthday. 1 week after that, she lived up in Southport area. 4 days after that, she was a summer school teacher, some of you probably have read that, Dawn Bowker. She was hit by a driver and instantly killed. And that was 4 days after that. And so a little tough. So I've been up and down and around. My big support was people at work. I haven't been in Missoula that long, about 3 years. By the way, my ex-wife who lived up there, all the food in the world for, right away, and then dwindle, and then 4 or 5 months later, the friends stopped coming, etc. So there's something there that people need to know about. Right. It doesn't end right away. I think we're in a society of quick fix. Right. That we should get over grief right away and everything. The thing about that you said about different people grieve different ways, the same person grieves in different ways depending on who it was they lost. I almost feel guilty now that I didn't grieve much when my father passed away. It was probably a 1.5 year sickness. I expected it. He was 80-something years old, and all of a sudden my daughter passes, and I just wasn't ready. Just wasn't ready at all. I didn't know how to handle it. And I worked for a couple months trying to do the man thing again. Avoidance, well, men don't cry, men don't grieve, whatever. I'm not a very good man. I really am, if that's a thing. But with the hospice group, it's somebody to talk to, and I can't believe perfect strangers. I can talk to them, and they can. It's an amazing thing. I didn't think I could talk to. I'd break down every time I try to even look at her pictures and all that sort of stuff. It's really something. But there's something about it. It's created as the process has gone on, and it's been a little over 5 months now. I'm a totally new person. It's like she slapped me in the face and said, "Dad, get with it. Get with it." There were some things that I either wasn't doing or I was doing wrong or whatever. And boy, all of a sudden, I finally, after 10 years, I bought myself a professional trumpet. I was a professional trumpet player for years. And my trumpet burned up in a band fire 10 years ago, and I never replaced it. Had to borrow clunkers here and there. I joined the athletic club. My spiritual life is changing. It's almost like, at one point as I knew this was going on, I almost felt guilty. Did she have to die for me? It was like an Easter thing. Oh my gosh. And yet, there's a lot of good that does it. We are new people. We're never going to be the person we used to be. And anyway, I talked a lot. Mostly, if anybody needs information on that hospice, I really, it's good. It really is. Thank you.
I have a question for Dale. You spoke about, as a professional, you think we do, like say in the hospitals, do a good job of dealing with the death at the time, but not so well after that. Have you any suggestions of what that support might look like? Are you thinking just in terms of the natural networks that are out there, of utilizing those, or do you think there should be some kind of follow-up, as there is with hospice? I work in the hospice program, right. And there's a year's follow-up bereavement services that go with that. Do you think something like that should be instituted in the hospital kind of system?
I've always worked in the hospital, acute care, cardiac. That's 20 plus years of my nursing career. And I do think most of the time we do a good job supporting the family when there's a death. Sudden death is extra hard because you don't anticipate it. And I've learned you're never You're never quite ready for someone you love to die. So even with hospice, when you're anticipating it, you're never quite ready. And I think most of the time we do a very good job in the hospital, but if the healthcare professionals themselves haven't experienced a loss or been a part or don't know what to say or do, then there are times when I think the healthcare professionals just kind of step back and don't get too close. So it's kind of like that double-edged sword. Some people do great, some people don't. I mean, when I came into the ER here, one nurse told me to sit in a chair and wait to register the patient. Well, my initial reaction was like to strangle him, because there was no way I was going to sit in a chair and wait for the registration clerk to be ready. Another nurse came from behind the ER desk and just grabbed me, took the insurance card and the stuff I was kind of fumbling with, handed it to the insurance clerk, and she took me back into the room. Now, she knew me, but I don't think she should have to know me for that to take place. I think that should be offered to every family. Now, that's a hard one, and I think that's slowly changing over time. But what I would like to see, and I've gone back to school and I'm working, to talk to families about their bereavement experience after sudden death. Because I think you have to start there with what's their experience before you can then start making changes. But I think healthcare professionals should keep in contact with people. The comment was made about how the family in a month wants to know some of the details and look at the reports. And, I think they may want to know what happened in the hospital. And if we don't let them see that or be a part of it, and again, they may not process it at that moment, they may need it later. There are some hospitals that have bereavement programs, and they keep in touch with families after someone has died. Probably more so the oncology, our colleagues in oncology do a much better job with bereavement support most of the time, mostly due to hospice work. But, I think we could do a better job supporting those families over time. And I've taken care of heart failure patients here and gotten to know them over months. And then I still keep in touch with one of the guy's wives because I know her daughter-in-law and son, and the grandkids were the same age as my kids, and so I still keep in touch with her. But yeah, that's more the exception rather than the norm.
I'm a minister, and actually, one of our members lost a grandchild this past week, and been working with the family, and I think that the church has done a good job rallying around to try to help them. But I was wondering, I have two questions. Basically, do you have any thoughts on helping a young couple deal with the loss of a child at 3 months? And then secondly, are you aware of any support groups in the community, especially down towards the Hamilton area, that they might find some support from?
I'm just going to make one comment because someone I'm working with has done a lot of research on couples who have grieved the loss of a child. And it is well known that although they've had the same loss, the couple themselves will not necessarily grieve the same way. And that can be very hard for a couple to work through. But it doesn't mean that all couples who've lost a child end up divorced, which is sometimes what people incorrectly think. Some of those relationships are strengthened, but you have to find a way to allow different grieving patterns. And males tend to grieve differently than females, and some females have more of a male grieving pattern, and some males have more, it's kind of, there's no rules around it. So that's one thing I know, and I could give you some references that way. But then a friend of mine lost a child at about 2 weeks of age. This was years ago. And the Compassionate Friends group was very important to her for a period of time, and Maureen, you can probably, I don't know that much about that group.
I'll be glad to.
I'm not actually sure if there is a Compassionate Friends group in Hamilton or in Ravalli County, but we have a very active one here in Missoula. And in addition to them just coming together for monthly meetings, they have people who will reach out to newly bereaved folks on a one-to-one or family-to-family basis, and many people find that extremely helpful. And they have these little subgroups, and one is for parents who've lost a young child. So it's a great connection. It's worth trying. As the panel members have said, not everything works for everybody, and not everything works at any specific point in time. But one of the things that I appreciate most about Compassionate Friends is how they will do that one-on-one, and it's people who know, people who have been through it.
Thank you.
I might ask if anybody else has ideas or suggestions.
I have one
Marcus,
idea.
Dave.
I have one
Okay,
idea.
go ahead.
I worked with a family who lost a baby at 4 months through SIDS, and there's a good support group online. And that was a good initial step for them because it was so informal, and they later moved into Compassionate Friends, but just that immediate, anytime you want to just sit down and somebody will respond to you was, I think, a real help to them.
Was it, did you Google SIDS online, something like that?
I don't know exactly what the
Yeah, that sounds.
one was.
Yeah, I think that would work.
Was it a SIDS death?
Yeah, well, they're not exactly sure what
Okay.
it is. I met with them today, and it's, at this point, they're terminating it undetermined.
Okay. Well, the social workers at Community Hospital are also very helpful resources because that's something that they work with, and I'd be happy to give you those names and numbers later as well. You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Any other questions?
I just have one other comment. My mother-in-law has Alzheimer's, and that is just an awful disease because here's somebody who's so vital, and she's had the disease for about 7 years now, and there's nothing of who she was left. And she's had to make that terrible transition from paying for her own care to moving into, Medicaid. And they go so far as to have you cash out your life insurance and prepay your burial. So my husband and his brother had to actually make her funeral arrangements before she passed away. And somehow we have to do something better than that. That just seems just too harsh and too, I don't know, it just made me angry.
It's another example of the anticipatory grieving that some of the folks on the panel talked about. Complicated by practicalities of daily living. Does anybody else on the panel have comments that you'd like to make, that maybe things that you thought about after you spoke?
I thought of something. In my nervousness, I forgot to mention that I did go to the hospice grief workshop that Greg puts on. That was wonderful for me. It was, 6-7 months after Josh had died, and it helped me tremendously. It gave me a lot of information, and I got to hear what other people were going through, and was able to take that back into the family. Even though they felt they weren't ready, they wanted to hear what I was doing. And I didn't mention my grandson, who I've gotten very close with. I was close with him before, but since they're back in Missoula, and he loves being here and loves that they've come back here. And so he's been embraced by the family, and he has done a little bit of counseling, but it's been very difficult for him, and it was good to hear about what the different ages of children go through, because he does have a whole different take on it. I can be out with him and having a great time, and he'll make some off-the-wall comments, and then he's right back to having fun, and I'm hanging, going, okay, well, we'll do that one again, But it's working, and I'm seeing that he's grieving, but the more we play, the more that I see that he relaxes and grieves and makes comments to me about, oh, Dad used to bring me here, and I'm really upset that he died. Oh, let's go have an ice cream now, And so, but I'm aware that he's grieving while he's doing that, and so, thank you.
Greg, I have a question, and we should say it's that Greg, not this Greg who does the hospice group, right? Okay.
Hi, Greg.
What is it like on a personal note for people in your job, particularly when it affects somebody who you know? How do you do that?
We have, probably the hardest call I've ever had to do was to notify a deputy's wife after he'd been shot during the night, and to grab her and the kids to bring her here to St. Pat's and to make that notification. So that's pretty tough. But we had a recent incident at the sheriff's office where the deputy's young son was accidentally killed, and so we've gone through that process as well. And this year I probably attended 4 or 5 funerals of officers that have been killed in the line of duty. So that is, I don't want to talk about this anymore.
It's never easy.
Yeah, it's never easy.
Yeah. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but...
No, that's okay. I'll individually here, but...
Okay. All right. Do you want to add anything, Terry, before we close? I think we're really lucky to live in a community where there are so many caring people and so many resources, and of course Families First and Seasons is one of those. And so if you came tonight not knowing or not being certain whether you'd be interested in tomorrow's Grief Institute offering, is there still room, Erin, for people to sign up, or do they just show up if they're interested? I'm sorry?
They just come in the morning, 9
Yep.
o'clock, right here.
9 o'clock right here tomorrow morning. It's all day. And you can get more information from Erin then before you leave. Before we do leave, I would like to show our appreciation to all these people who gave of their time and their emotions tonight to help us understand a little better what this is all about. Thank you all.